Hello, in this video we'll be covering the section of grief. There's not too much hard information here, so we're just going to go through it hopefully quickly. So grief is simply a response to a loss, of a valued thing. So whether that be your house, your child, your family, it depends what your value you place on that, and it is a traumatic experience. So depending on how much value you have invested into the thing, it can be a little higher, it can be a little bit lower. There's a lot of personal factors that influence this that we'll talk about in a second. But in terms of what you need to know, we have this Kubler-Ross, which I'm sure you've heard of. At least the actual, when I draw it down here, you'll understand. So it says that we have our processes that people go through in response to grief, which goes denial, anger, depression, and acceptance. So that's the big thing. I know you've heard of that before from some source, but just remember there are stages of grief that we kind of want to make sure we're paying attention to. There aren't going to be a lot of questions on this, but it is important to know in real practice. So getting more into the heavy details of this. So grief, we have some categories. So this is another area I've seen a couple questions on, but not too much. So we have three general ones. Anticipatory, and then we have our chronic side. So let's make it here. We have chronic grief and chronic sorrow. So what's going on with these? So anticipatory, this happens before the event. So fix that real quick. So prior, so you have an infant in the ICU, a family member in the ICU, and things aren't looking very good. You really think they're going to die. You're sad about that. You're just waiting for that event to actually occur. That's what's going on. And in anticipatory, chronic grief is unresolved. So this is issues that this person is going to be going through chronically. It's not like a week, 2 weeks or anything. This is like months on months and months of unresolved. And sorrow, the big key standard with this one is it's cyclic. So these ones are also not resolved. So you might hear in literature or a book, they're talking about the person who lost a spouse or a family member, and it was 20 years ago and they still remember that person and yada, yada, yada. But just remember, it's cyclic. It comes and goes, but there isn't any resolution. They're never able to accept that loss, and they just have to kind of deal with the symptoms. But not ideal, but it is out there, some of the things that can happen. We also want to pay a little difference to the men versus women differences, because we have fathers and mothers. There's not just one person that made this baby. A lot of the literature, men are a little bit different in terms of how they're going to react. The big influencing factor is going to be the investment. So how invested was the father in this pregnancy? Were they a spur of the moment thing? Was it with their wife that they've been trying to get pregnant for years? Or what's going on? So it really depends on a lot of different factors for men, and the behaviors that they're going to exhibit are going to be a little bit different. Men usually are a little bit more, we're going to get into some stereotypical things, but they're going to be a little bit more isolated. They may give me a little more angry than in terms of sadness, but that's not all people. There are going to be exceptions to the rule. It's not like a hard rule. It's more of a stereotype, but just for conversation's sake. So mothers can go through a lot of different stages. These aren't necessarily stages, but symptoms. So we get shock, they get numbness to, just emotions in general, confusion, irritability, and anxiety. And then this can progress to a couple other feelings that they're going to feel. It's just sadness, longing, And then this is a big part of it, is guilt. So a lot of these family parents often feel a lot of guilt, like their actions or something that they did in their history was the cause of what happened, which it's 99% of the time not true. The genetic things happen, mutations happen, infections. You can do your best and still get an infection. So just know that we're going to have to be addressing the guilt pretty frequently. Then we have somatic symptoms or complications. Now going over to our other side of grief. So we have influencing factors. So the individual itself, or himself, herself, has a history of a personal history of various things, and that is going to, and how they were able to resolve those issues are going to really influence how well or poorly they're able to deal with stress in general, along with grief and anything along those emotional lines. It's really going to depend on how prepared they were for this, how resilient they were mentally and emotionally before this happened. But it is an individual process. And it can be influenced by a couple things. So one of those is just social prohibitions. And this is going to be a big cultural thing. So some cultures, they will grieve quietly, silently to themselves. Other cultures, if there's something that they're grieving, they may rant, riot, scream, throw themselves on the floor. It just depends on their social background, what their culture expects of them, and what they just have been witness to throughout their life. In terms of the influencing factors, it can end up coming to what we call behaviors, or these are some more of those symptoms things. So the common ones go into two groups, really. We have our somatic, and these are actual physical symptoms. And so somatics is going to be like loss of appetite. You don't have energy. You can't get up in the morning. You can't come to work. You can't do anything like that. And then we have our behavioral. And these are our psychological symptoms. And it's not usually going to be one or the other. There is compounding going on. So they'll experience one, they'll experience the other one at the same time. They'll make things better and worse. So it's really a difficult process to deal with for a lot of these patients. And another thing we have is our at-risk groups. So again, it really depends on the person's resiliency, and that's going to be built on a lifetime of either successfully or unsuccessfully overcoming obstacles, dealing with stress, with grief. If this is, they have never experienced death in their life, it's something that they can have a lot of problems with. But if they've had other challenges, it can be, different. But some of those high-risk groups are those that have psychological illness, so they're already dealing with depression. Ones that are childless, so this might be the loss of a first child, or this could be the loss of the fifth child, where they've all been either spontaneously aborted or something else unfortunate happened. And another group is going to be our group with poor social support. This is the one that we're more familiarly going to see. So the single mother that lives on her own, has to work to pay her own bills, doesn't get any support, doesn't know the baby's father, has some high-risk behaviors in her personal life. Those are all going to influence and make it even more harder for this person to cope with these stress. And it's, it's understandable. You think a lot of these moms that they come in, they have a father, a brother, sisters, family members, external support, anything like that can help them out. But then there's other mothers that just they seem to have everything against them, and everything's going wrong. They don't have anyone they can turn to. They don't have any religious groups to follow, or they're not a believer. And those are some of those problems that will come up. But it's not all bad. We can identify these problems, these high-risk groups, and our role as the provider, no matter what the level you are, is going to be, what can we do to help? Can we provide more of that support, social support? Can we get emotional support to them through other providers? That's what they're there for, is to help these mothers deal with their problems, and even the fathers too. They're going to be equally upset if anything does happen. So that's it. This one's going to be short and brief, but we'll talk to you in the next one.